haven't been able to be here until now. It's not because I'm only interested in hearing myself speak. It's that I had commitments earlier today that I couldn't leave. I also can't read my notes because I've left my spectacles at home, so please aim off. I don't think I entirely understand what the knowledge economy is, but I'm going to have a few thoughts on knowledge and the economy, on neither of which I'm very expert. But what I am clear is that science and innovation is a key driver for the economy, and I'm sure you've covered this earlier today. I mean, all the statistics about the percentage of reference paper for our population, for our inputs to R&D, are astonishing. We're second only to the United States in the life sciences, fourth in the world on normal science. Now, what is necessary for the economy to thrive after Brexit? Again, I don't think I have anything particularly original, but I've just got a few thoughts, which again you may have covered earlier. The first one is technology. Obviously, really exciting developments the whole time. Many of them thought of or generated here, if not developed here. That's the point I'll come back to. But we've also got to be realised when we're talking about vocational training, as Lord Glasman was a minute ago, university training, that technology is also very disruptive. Have we given enough thought to artificial intelligence, significance, to robotics, to what I only learnt about last week? When I say learnt about it, I heard the expression, and I said, please explain to me what that is. And I had a Wellcome Trust know to give me very simple answers, because I won't understand otherwise, quantum computing, infinite computing. Now, so technology, money. I belong to an organisation which is lucky enough to have a great deal of money to spend. The trick and the difficulty is spending it wisely. But in terms, I'm very struck by the fact that, you know, time and again, there is a gap between the ideas generated in our university and their implementation and their translation into diagnostics, into pieces of kit. This is an old, old problem of the valley of death. You heard, I think, this morning from Pete Davis and what he's trying to do with Oxford, which is very exciting and which we've invested in. We also, in the Wellcome Trust, have started a company called Syncona, which has just amalgamated with Beckett, again, to try and break the terrible British inability to really make the maximum of the ideas we generate and take products, healthcare issues, and really give them the money they need to thrive. We typically sell things far too early. There's plenty of seed money, there's not enough development money. This can't all be done by the Wellcome, and I think one of the things I hope our new government, whoever they will be, will think about is whether they can help in that funding gap. Skills, we heard a little about that a minute ago. We need them at all levels, including for the new technologies, for example, bioinformatics, data analysis. We haven't got anything like enough people like that. But it's not only those specialised skills, it's also management skills and commercial skills. It seems to me, and again talking to Pete Davis about this, that younger academics, and maybe Colin and Louise will want to mention this, are much better tuned in to the commercialisation of some of their research products than perhaps the earlier generations were. I'm very struck by the fact that in the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, they spin out a company every 6 hours. Your university does pretty well, and I'm sure you do too well, and nothing like that. Not even one a day, I don't think, let alone every 6 hours. Other important things for the thriving of science in this country are the cross-pollination. Science is absolutely international. I mean, coming from the background I come from, one viewed all foreigners with deep suspicion. And you didn't allow any of them in your building except under strict control and scrutiny. One of the things I found very refreshing about the Wellcome Trust, and indeed before that when I was chair of Imperial, is you'd go into any lab in Imperial, you'd ask somebody where they came from, and they'd say Belarus, and you'd think, what the hell's that? That's that nasty dictator there. People doing super stuff here. Whatever immigration system we have, we must continue to get that cross-pollination of ideas. Why? Because while we in the UK have got some super ideas, they can always be got better by other people. And here I just touch on the clusters versus geography. We have to fund excellence. If excellence is done in a remote university of the UK, we will fund it. But it is easier for remote, wonderful work to be done in universities in certain areas that work together. Now, this is unpopular. It's politically unpopular because it doesn't spread the butter everywhere, but it's the realistic issue. Now, the Northern Powerhouse, yeah, we fund into Manchester. It's a cracking good university. But we only fund into Manchester not to help the northern economy, but because it's got cracking good, excellent science. A final thing, this is all sort of broadly the economy, if you didn't notice. Two final things. One, ambition. I think in the UK, people starting up businesses can be too much on creating value rather than really capturing it and building big businesses. Why haven't we built really big businesses in the UK? Or why have we built so few? My head of investment, who did jolly well last year, 19%, says it's because British business people just want the rectory and the BMW. They're not concerned about building a company that lasts forever. I say, that's a bit unfair. He said, you look. The final point on this economic environment, patient capital. Now, Damon Buffini is doing a review for government. He's one of the governors of the trust on how to make sure we have long-term capital. Because without it, all these things we're talking about don't last. Three things that are important for British science. Migration and immigration, I touched on already. Whatever system we need needs to be slick and speedy for short-term visitors and for long-term visitors. We must not fall into the trap of saying everybody has to have talent or everybody has to be earning over a certain sum before we give them a visa to come here. We need technicians. We need the team who come with a visiting professor. We need to be able to get in people for short-term conferences who are quite junior and for long-term appointments. I mean, one of the delights of the American election is that people in the UK who are thinking of stepping westwards as the start of a brain drain have actually put their brakes on quite fast, and we in the Wellcome Trust regularly get inquiries as to whether we can fund people coming in the other direction. There's an opportunity here which we're discussing with government at the moment. But whatever system we have, we need early resolution, because confidence is eroding among some foreign academics here, both academics and students, and we don't want to lose some of our stars in this transition period. So it's not just what the immigration rules are, it's the messaging and the mood. If people think they're unwelcome, Indian students, before Brexit, it matters. If you take the Sanger Institute, I probably talked on for too long, I won't be a minute. If you take the Sanger Institute, wholly owned by the Wellcome Trust, Genomics Institute, mapped part of the human genome, one of the two leading institutes in the world, the other's the Broad in Boston. Our applications for PhDs since Brexit have gone down by half. We need these PhDs because they're the seed corn for the future, and they're the seed corn for influencing and energising and keeping going British science so it's right at the top. Of course, migration is needed for startups in other sectors, but I'm just talking about this one. Funding. We have got the issue I mentioned before about excellence versus geographic spread. One of the advantages of the EU system is that through our influence, the European funding of science is not geographic. It doesn't go to Slovenia in X% because they need it. It goes to the best science, from which we, the UK, have done very well, 16%. So I think a wish we have is that after Brexit, we retain access to that system if it is possible with associate membership, which indeed it should be, as Norway has it. These aren't binary choices. I've heard people say ridiculous things. Never mind, you can deal with, you can just do science with Canada and America and the Middle East and the Far East. We don't want to make those choices. We want still to be working closely in, if possible, some European mechanism with the Max Planck, the Louis Pasteur, and the Scandinavians. Finally, other opportunities on regulation. One thing that strikes me very much about the UK is we're quicker and speedier on dealing with ethical issues. Take the mitochondria debate, gene editing, take the possibility of further GM activities. We can do this with speed. If we have some lighter regulation, but we'll need lots of regulation, and the possibility here of doing more clinical trials rather than having given them up already, there are opportunities there. These ideas, which I just mentioned, you've probably covered this morning. Most of them are already getting into the early drafts of the industrial strategy, and we hope very much that they will materialise. Sorry for talking so long.
Thanks very much. So while Louise comes up, I should just point out, I forgot to, that I'm actually not Professor Sir Steve Smith. I'm Colin Reardon, Vice Chancellor of Cardiff University. Steve can't be with us, so I'm standing in. Louise.
Thank you very much for coming this afternoon. I know it's late in the day, and at this time of the day, I like my speakers to be short and succinct. So I'm actually only going to make 3 points, and they're, as it turns out, the same points Dame Eliza made, which are on migration, funding, and regulation, though my emphasis is slightly different. So first, investment at universities. It is imperative that we continue and we up our investment in universities. It's the best possible return on investment you can get. And with this, we can be in the vanguard of driving the new economy. But if we are to maintain or indeed enhance our current position, we need the fewest possible constraints on the movement of students and academics, first. And second, we need access to international networks of funding and research collaboration. And the third point is that to play the role we can in driving the economy, we need our autonomy, dare I say, our expertise, to be respected. We are experts in running universities, not in solving all societal ills, and Lord Glassman alluded to this a moment ago. Poor performance in schools, for example, is the responsibility of the Department of Education, not and should not be the responsibility for universities. Oxford was ranked the best university in the world this year. 3 British universities were ranked in the top 10. 6 of the top 10 European universities are British. Now, I've never really understood why more pride is not taken in this fact. I've never understood why it is that elite is an accolade when applied to a football team, but a criticism when applied to a university. To stay with the sporting analogy for a moment, another area where Britain has excelled in recent years has been in sports. In the Rio Olympics, Britain finished second in the world, ahead of China, a country with 22 times our population. The reason we did so well is because UK sport took a laser-like focus to British sport and invested in success. They identified sports with the potential for global dominance and invested in them. They hired coaches and let them do what coaches do best, coach. They didn't insist that the coaches, while preparing for Olympic competition, set up feeder teams for children or raise sporting attainment in the local sporting clubs. They didn't subject coaches to a coaching excellence framework, requiring all coaches in all sports to complete endless templates to demonstrate the value of their coaching. No, they trusted the professionals to do what the professionals do best, knowing that their interest is completely aligned with the national interest. If only the same attitude could be adopted towards universities. Our interests, too, are completely aligned with the national interest. Universities like ours have for centuries served as drivers of the economy, as engines of social mobility, as guardians of our culture, as foundations of our democracy, and as generators of innovative practices and new ideas. We've proven time and time again that we're pretty good at it. So why not trust us, get on with it? British universities contribute £40 billion, or 2.8% of GDP. We support over 750,000 jobs, or 3% of all jobs. We generate 11 billion of export earnings, over 73 billion of output a year. These figures are actually from a few years ago. And they don't begin to capture the economic contribution of universities which address weaknesses in the economy, from lagging labor, productivity, to skills shortages, and low investment in R&D. University business research collaboration are worth over 3.5 billion. In London alone, the net contribution of foreign students is 2.3 billion pounds. An analysis by BIS found that a 1% increase in the share of the workforce with a university degree raises the level of long-term productivity by between 0.2 and 0.5%. Now, these figures only speak to the economic contribution of universities. The more intangible but invaluable contribution of our universities to our intellectual, social, and cultural life are impossible to quantify. But in an ever more complex world, suffused with a barrage of information, it has never been more important that we have a population educated to tell the difference between information and knowledge, not to mention wisdom. So then, universities generate and translate world-class research, we drive innovation, and we educate the future workforce. This is all essential to the UK's productivity. Oxford alone, according to a recent report by Bigger Economics, adds £7.1 billion to the global economy, 5.8 billion in the UK. We support over 50,000 jobs in the UK. I'm afraid we can't compete, but we will, with MIT. We don't produce a spin-out every 6 hours, but we do produce one every 2 weeks, which is not bad.
It's very good, and I didn't mean to...
No, we aspire to do more. In fact, over the past decade, we have averaged a fraction of one every 2 months, and we have in the past year or so, thanks in part to OSI, which was alluded to by Dame Eliza. This is a fund which has raised £580 million globally to invest in the IP generated at Oxford, providing both capital and funding expertise. The most recent tranche of this money, the £280 million, all came from outside the UK. So the rest of the world has no doubt about the caliber of the research conducted in this country. We need a little more internal faith in it. Locally, we add about 2.3 billion to the Oxfordshire economy. The tourists we attract bring £100 million a year to the city. We employ 17,000 staff. We spend 250,000 in Oxford. Local Science Park adds 155 million a year to the local economy, supports 2,800 jobs. I could go on and on. But in order to keep doing this, we need investment, we need autonomy, and we need access to European students, staff, and research funding. So we need the kind of investment we need is in infrastructure like the East-West rail link, so that our top universities can be linked more effectively to one another and to their peers in London. We need investment in science and innovation because we operate in a global marketplace. We need to be able to pay global salaries. Matching American salaries has become 20% more expensive in the past year. We are competing very effectively with institutions whose endowment dwarf ours. Harvard's endowment, our endowment, colleges and university together, is 1/7 of Harvard's endowment. I'm not sure if you've noticed, but we're ranked 1 in the world, and they're ranked 6. So we're doing very well. So we are a lean, mean operation, and we can do very well, but we need the investment to do so. The standing of British universities is only possible because of the contribution of our European staff and the funding from the European Research Councils. The top 4 recipients of Horizon 2020 funding are British: Oxford, Cambridge, UCL, and Imperial. 6 of the top 10 recipients of Horizon 2020 funding are British. We need to be able to continue to compete for this funding, and we need to be able to continue to attract academics whose funding can be supported by the European Research Council. Academics who have ERC grants, if we want to be able to attract them, we have got to make that happen. It goes without saying that our EU staff and students need to get the right to remain. And I would agree entirely with Dame Eliza's point about the corrosive emotional impact of the uncertainty in our communities. It is eroding the fabric of our communities that our EU citizens do not know whether they or their children will be able to remain. They need to be reassured on this point as quickly as possible. Of course, it would also go without saying. Okay, it goes without saying that students should be taken out of the net migration figures too, but it doesn't look like that's going to happen. Final point, the problems universities address, whether it's disease, whether it's climate change, whether it's terrorism, what have you, these are not national problems. These problems traverse national borders. And the only way to address them effectively is to bring international cohorts together to work on them. If we can do this, if we can be freed from what Lord Glassman called overburdening universities with regulation, if we can compete globally for staff and students and research funding, then we can continue to lead the world. But I think it is a mistake to assume that we will be able to continue to do so, because I do believe that the future of our great universities is in jeopardy. Thank you.
It's entirely safe. I've been labelled as an expert, but I want to say that apart from being a part-time civil servant and academic, I did also create a spin-out from a university, one of the, I think, only spin-outs from the central administration of a university, which I subsequently sold to Thomson Reuters, so I have some commercial experience as well, and I hope that compensates. What I want to talk about particularly is international collaboration, because international collaboration is an absolutely essential part of anything that a knowledge-based economy now does. In the 1980s, about 5% of the research papers that the UK and most similar large economies produced had an international co-author. This year, something like 55% or more will have an international co-author. There's been a huge shift in international collaboration over the last 30 years. And if we look at the sort of figures that are produced by the Government Office of Science, and they praise the way in which the UK's productivity and its output of research has gone up, we can see that almost all of that growth in output has been through that international collaboration route. The domestic research output has been pretty constant over the period. And when we look closely at the research performance of those papers and the units that produce those papers, and this is done by analysts using the number of times that papers are cited in the research literature, then we can see that it's actually the international collaborative part of the UK's output that is the most highly cited. It's that section of the research output that is the most used by other academics, that contributes most to the innovation that is useful elsewhere in the economy. And the distribution of that is far from even across the research base, because it's universities like Oxford and Cambridge and the big London colleges and the Russell Group members who are the most collaborative. They're the institutions that have the greatest engagement with similar universities overseas. And they also make the greatest gain in research performance from that collaboration. If we look at it in detail, we find that something like 60% of that collaboration is with other European countries. The largest individual collaborative partner is still the United States, but the rate of collaboration with France and Germany is substantially faster than with the US now. And we also collaborate massively with the Netherlands, with the Scandinavian countries, has been mentioned. In fact, 15 of the 21 countries with which we share 1% of our research output are elsewhere in Europe. So there's a very high dependency on that relationship with Europe. We already collaborate with South Korea, Taiwan, other growing economies, as well as with Brazil, India, and China. But we're not going to readily be able to substitute those partnerships we have across Europe for new partnerships that we're going to discover somewhere else in the world that we don't already have a significant amount of investment in. And those regions are also becoming more collaborative, so they already have many other partners. And there are regional groupings emerging. China has a fantastic amount of soft diplomacy with Asia-Pacific countries through its research activities. It's investing in their universities with research equipment and IT infrastructure, which is establishing a very long-term relationship there. So that makes it all the more difficult for the UK to become a partner. Now, we talk about this dependency upon our relationship with the UK's relationship with these other countries, this collaborative partnership. What we need to remember is that actually it isn't a UK partnership with Germany. It's a partnership between individual research groups in the UK and individual research groups in Germany and France and Sweden and the US. It's an individual thing. It's not like a trade or a finance relationship. This is driven by individual commitment, by a recognition by chemists in one country and another that they will gain significantly intellectually, that they will improve their knowledge base and career development through that partnership. And so if we're going to promote this, we need to find mechanisms that will support those sorts of relationships. So what is good for the engineers may not be good for the chemists in the same relationship. We need to focus in on where the best opportunities are. And that is most likely to be through agency-to-agency relationships. We already have a nice example where the Biotechnology and Biological Sciences Research Council, some 10 or 12 years ago, started a relationship with FAPESP, the science funding organization in Sao Paulo. That was based on a recognition of the benefits of investment in green energy with UK technology and with Brazilian and particularly Sao Paulo investment in their green economy and bioenergy. That's grown over 10 years to incorporate other research councils, but it starts from the recognition of a mutuality in quite a narrow area. The research councils have an excellent arrangement, excellent system in place for managing research relationships, recruiting proposals, peer reviewing those proposals, and then seeing through the funding. So what we need to think about to create a network of relationships across the world is a much wider relationship, a much wider network of these one-to-one agency relationships, not at the level of national agreements, but down at the level of science-identified opportunities, properly supported. And that's critical because one of the biggest barriers to international collaboration is what we would call double jeopardy. And that is that if a scientist in the UK and the scientist in the US want to collaborate together, they each have to find their own piece of funding quite independently. And of course, the benefits of getting that funding are partly based on their being able to collaborate. And so each of their national agencies says, well, it's no good us funding you if the other chap doesn't get the money as well. So we need these bilateral arrangements to underpin this, to enable researchers in two countries to apply jointly for money to underpin their collaborative projects. One more thing to say on this is that my experience in looking at our attempts to set up collaboration in other countries and to attract collaboration here is beset by incredibly bad marketing and public relations. We have agencies that are seeking to address that. Universities UK is working with other agencies to promote the UK elsewhere, but at the same time, one comes across problems with a misunderstanding of how another country's research support system works, and we come across stories. I have come across senior staff in universities in Asia who tell me that they have tried to contact a university in this country and essentially they've been given the runaround. And if we want to promote a much wider network of international collaboration that will continue to support the very best research and underpin a knowledge-based economy, then we really have got to sort out that aspect of entertaining partnerships elsewhere. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Jonathan. Now, we literally have 1 minute, so one question, which is brief, thank you, and briefly answered, if we may.
I'll be quick. Benjamin Bilski at Pericles Foundation. I've co-authored and co-edited a book on innovations and breakthroughs with a foundation in the Netherlands, and we studied networks of innovation and the conditions that make successful environments of innovation. So I agree with many of the panelists who have raised the right concerns, need the right talent, need the right funding, but one factor, as Professor also pointed out, is to create a network of partners where all relevant stakeholders are involved. In one case study we've put together on the University of Groningen in the Netherlands, for example, when they stated their core mission and named healthy aging as part of their mission, they have jumped up in the last 10 years from the 100 to 150 range all the way up to 90, 80, 70. They're in their 70s now in global rankings, and part of that is because they built a campus devoted to healthy aging. They've got university researchers, hospitals, government, local government, pension funds, partnership that they've made with the Mayo Clinic, European Union funding, all coming together. They're generating patents.
Sorry, but can I ask you what your question is?
My question is, do you see, and anybody can answer this, do you see the role of the university changing? Do you see the role of foundations changing when it comes to not so much focusing on the role of what you've done historically, but focusing on a particular mission area and then building the coalition necessary to carry that out?
The foundation, which I'm the chair of, is changing the whole time. We have twice as much money to spend as we had when I joined it 9 years ago. So all the time we're thinking, how can we spend this money better? How can we address the global challenges of ageing, dementia, all these problems? So absolutely yes, we're always looking for partnerships. We're funded all around the world, and we're looking for new and fresh ways of doing things, as I think universities are precisely doing. But they will answer themselves. Colin, you haven't said anything.
Yes, well, I'm afraid we're going to have to leave it there, but I think we've made the really key point, which is that scale and diversity really matter for research in building a knowledge economy, and international research collaboration is a must if we want to retain the advantages that we have as a country. So the question then just becomes, how do we do it? And we've had some suggestions. So thank you very much indeed. Can you please thank the panel?
Ladies and gentlemen, I'm just going to hijack the agenda for a moment. So just following on from that discussion, I'm just going to ask Anthony Clegg, who's been listening to it, who wants to announce something that he's been working on along the theme of innovation and prosperity. Anthony.
Thanks very much, Jonathan, and thank you everybody here late into the afternoon. We've heard a lot about innovation throughout the day and the need to monetize the intellectual property within our universities and the research sector. We've also heard from Pete Davis and from the Wellcome Trust that there's lots of seed capital around. As we organised this conference, and I was involved with the advisory board in setting this up, what we wanted to do was establish a record of what we'd done. And the first thing we're working on following today's events will be a book or a record of all the panels we've had and all the speeches that function as a record of this moment in time, a small bit of history to show what people were thinking 7 or 8 months after the vote. The second thing we're looking to do is to create some quite prescriptive and precise policies for the government. As Paul mentioned earlier this morning, we did have a long list of government ministers due to attend and a long list of MPs, many of whom couldn't come. But I think in a way that works to our advantage because it means we can produce a very succinct and precise document summarising lots of the recommendations and the points to emerge from the discussions today. But finally, in terms of something more tangible, what we wanted to do was to create an incentive for many people to follow up on the ideas that we've heard today. And with that in mind, working with some of the partners at Marshall Wace and indeed with many of the attendees here today, over the last few weeks I've been organising a prize fund, a philanthropic gift to create so that we could put aside a pool of money to reward individuals within universities and research departments and institutions around the UK so that we could allow them to exploit and extract their ideas. We've heard a great deal about how this operates within the scientific space, and we've heard a bit about the works of OSI in Oxford. But the aim of this prize is to make sure that we're incentivising entrepreneurial ideas both within the traditional scientific space, but also within medicine, technology, biotech, finance, maths, and also within the broader entrepreneurial concepts that we've discussed. We had a great idea earlier in terms of free ports that was discussed this morning and how that might apply. And that's really to remind everybody that the scope of the challenge facing us is huge, and we want a prize to reward entrepreneurial endeavour across the spectrum. So with that in mind, we've pulled together a £2 million prize fund, which hopefully will grow following today's events, to allow us to create a series of prizes to reward those individuals within the next 2 years who create ideas that we think can transform the UK as we enter this vital stage of our development. I'd add to that that during today's events, Uber and Google have announced that they'll be trialling flying cars in 2020. So it's important that we're extremely ambitious in terms of what we seek to achieve. So before handing back to Jonathan, I'd like to thank all of the organisers today and the donors who've come forward to put money up for this prize. We'll be publishing details this summer with the aim of running the prize over the next 2 years, such that we award prizes early in 2019 to coincide with Brexit itself. So with that, I'll hand back to Jonathan and back to the main agenda.